We hear a lot of perspectives on the Mankind podcast. Inclusion of a guest is not an endorsement of their views, and the opinions expressed here do not always represent the mission or values of the Mankind Project USA.
Looks like the rain has gone.
G'day and welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than one way to be a man. And I am your host, Brandon Clift. Today, we are talking with Dr. Kevin Payne to talk about exactly that, pain. Now, as you can imagine, love a bit of irony. But as you can imagine, when we talk about conversations around pain, I don't know the narratives you had growing up as a man, but for me, it was you experience pain, you lock that stuff down. Because if you admit you're experiencing pain or you express that you're in discomfort, man, that's a sure sign of weakness. And whether it's on the playground, whether it's in the work environment, most men or boys do not want to be outed as weak, do not want to be identified as weak. And so what is the cost of this? Is there a cost of this? For the longest time, it was just socially acceptable that men just don't express that stuff. They don't bring it up. They hold it down. That's something that women are allowed to do. Well, as it stands today in 2022, as it currently stands, that narrative is changing. Yet there are a lot of men that feel like they're perhaps not ready or there or able to get there just because of the environment they were raised in, who they were raised by in that environment, and the people they surround themselves with today. As someone who teaches leadership and emotional intelligence at the University of Tennessee, I get put in front of a huge array of individuals. And on our professional wing, I coach certain businesses through the applications of, emotional intelligence versus intellectual intelligence, stuff like that. And I work with a lot of tradespeople, a lot of tradesmen. They come in their work boots, work boots, words, there you go. Arms are folded and they're there because their boss has a stipend that they have to spend at the end of the tax year. So let's just say none of these blokes who are used to carrying heavy things and getting nose to nose in the workplace, none of them are really electing or putting their hands up to go through this sort of training. Yet at the end of a couple weeks, they don't want to leave. They love it. They're so bought in because an environment has finally been set up where they can talk about this stuff, where they can talk about pain. And of course, it relates to better bottom line and sure, all that business stuff. But as men, you think about that. These guys come in initially so hesitant, yet through time, through gaining trust, they want to open up more. They want to talk about their pain. They want to talk about their emotions. And so as a man, I want you to ask yourself, how do you relate with pain? Do you acknowledge it? Do you bring it up to those around you? Or do you try and ignore it and shove it down? Well, maybe it's time to look at pain a little bit differently because stats and data is coming out. The research around this has been done since, looks like the 80s, that it is proven that part of why men die earlier on average than women is because they're less likely to get things looked at. They're less likely to have their concerns addressed. And you're going to hear from Dr. Kevin Payne, you're going to hear from his story as someone who went 17 years before getting diagnosed with multiple sclerosis. They suspect that he had MS for 17 years before they were able to put a label on it because he didn't want to bring it up. He didn't want to look at it. He had other things, more important things, those things being his then wife's health issues that were far more important to him than little old Kevin and his challenges. When the dude had a serious chronic illness that was impacting his life, his wellness, and his livelihood as a whole. And so I want you to consider how you, as someone who perhaps identifies as male, how your relationship with pain, or perhaps your relationship with talking about the stuff that ails you, the challenges you may be having, how does that impact your overall happiness and wellness? Because the data has already proven that men do not just have a higher pain threshold than women. In fact, it's the opposite. It's through reducing the stigma around men's wellness, emotional wellness, mental wellness, physical wellness, by increasing the conversations that are had around men and their health challenges. Through that, through the destigmatization of these conversations and making them more normalized, I believe that we're going to be able to change that figure and raise the average life expectancy of men and stop losing some of our brothers, our fathers, our sons, our fellow men that we sit in circle with. It's time to talk about our pain, and we're going to do that today with Dr. Kevin Payne. Enjoy. All right, mate, ready to rock?
Well, I was born ready.
Born ready. There you go. G'day, guys. Brandon Clift here, and welcome to the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there's more than one way to be a man. And today we are joined by Dr. Kevin Payne. Kevin is a social psychologist, entrepreneur, author, podcast host, speaker, and D-licensed skydiver with over 500 jumps. As a former professor and man living with multiple sclerosis, Kevin shares the results of his extensive research concerning how to live a quality life with chronic distress, pain, and illness. His new book, Your Life Lived Well, The Science of Crafting a Good Life Under Chronic Distress, Pain, and Illness, is about to hit the shelves at the end of summer, and he is here with us today to dive deeper into how you, the listener, can overcome hardship to achieve a life lived well. Kevin, welcome to the show, mate.
Well, thank you so much for having me, Brandon. I will try to live up to that introduction.
You better, because that was a big intro. You better live up to it.
Yeah. I'm used to being a failure.
Well, you're a skydiver, so I hope not.
That is one thing that, you know, they really do say, if at first you don't succeed, then skydiving probably isn't for you.
Exactly. Can't blame the perfectly good aircraft.
There are no perfectly good aircraft.
Well, mate, I think it's ironic that you found yourself in the field of chronic pain with your last name.
You know, all of my, because I spent 15 years as a professor, and most of the classes I taught 30 different classes over that time. And most of the classes I taught were the scary ones, the statistics and research methodology and data science and that sort of thing. So all my students thought that my last name was appropriate.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Especially come test time. But you know, it's a good thing you're not a sociopath and you didn't get into this stuff just to live up to the name.
No. I've got expectations are crushing, so I try to avoid them and live in the moment and take what comes.
Yeah, for sure. Well, mate, look, your story is one that I wanted to bring onto the show and wanted to get out there. I think you have a unique lens on chronic illness because, you know, you've built your academic career focusing on understanding why some succeed and others fail under difficult circumstances. So having, you know, obviously you've got your diagnosis of having multiple sclerosis. I mean, only like 2006, right? Not knowing that you had it for years previously. I wonder, the field that you decided to get into, do you think partly the challenges that you were going through physically, mentally, emotionally, is that part of what steered you towards this field, or is it complete just happenstance that you ended up in that field?
I certainly wouldn't, you know, I wouldn't be surprised if it was subconsciously a factor, but it wasn't an explicit consideration when I started drifting in that direction. So really, when I started doing that research, it was in the field of education. And I wanted to understand why some people succeeded or failed academically under difficult circumstances. And from that, I kind of expanded and started looking at other sorts of circumstances. And so it kind of platformed out from there. And then, you know, in the last 12 or 15 years, it's really been focused on this issue of chronic illness. And how do you deal with a good life when you've got a condition that's never going to go away? Because all of our strategies are about getting distance from the bad things. Now you go all the way back to our primal selves, you know, our little cave monkey, you know, ancestors. This is how we are programmed, we are adapted to deal with bad things. We've got, people call it the fight or flight response. There's really a lot more to it than that. It's really freeze, front, flight, fight, fawn, flock, fright, faint. I call it the F it response. And
F it.
yeah, and all of those are about, this is scary. This is a potential threat. I'm going to get distance, either by trying to run away myself or try to push the bad thing away from me.
Right.
And we can't do that when the bad thing is right there in your body with you.
Absolutely. My fiance, she's a cancer survivor and had her full thyroid removed. So she is completely dependent on synthroid, liothyronine, like these synthetic hormones to survive. I mean, she can't go 5 to 6 weeks without it. She would pass. And it's amazing to just see how healthy her attitude is around that, going through the cancer journey and asking her kind of what it taught her. And she said in her own words, it taught me that my body isn't fighting against me. My body's fighting for me. It's just, I have this condition now that I have to live with for the rest of my life. And my body is continuing to put up the fight.
Yeah. And one of the other things that we have to learn too, is that we can't, it is natural for us to want to frame it as this is a fight. And sometimes there's no doubt about it, we've got to drop down into warrior mode and grit it out. But we can't live there. That is exhausting and depleting. And it engages all of the wrong parts of our body and our brain and our mind and our behaviors. So I'm not saying it's a bad thing. I'm saying it has to be put into context. And as men, that tends to be our go-to place when we are stressed.
Yeah.
And the long-term consequences of that can be really devastating, not only for us, but for the people around us as well. So it's not always a fight.
That's an interesting way to look at it. I definitely can relate to that. Yeah, fighting is just like, man, I just want to put the sword down. It does get exhausting. Whereas a common analogy, if we get into kind of like the mythopoetic side of things in men's work, is you can either go into the cave to slay the dragon, but you can also befriend the dragon, ride the dragon.
Yeah, it's it's Androcles and the lion. It's the classic Greek myth. You remember the story of Androcles?
No.
Yeah, he was an escaped slave, and he got out of the city and ran into the woods, and he heard the sounds of this awful lion that everybody had been talking about, had been roaming through the area, and it was coming closer, and it was louder, and it was awful, and he was like, oh, I'm not going to be able to get away. And there was the lion, and he thought, oh, I'm going to be eaten. And he looked closer, and he realized that in one of the lion's paws, it was all red, and and there was a thorn. And so he pulled the thorn from the lion's paw. They became buddies. And then, the typical coda to the story is that he was recaptured. He was placed in the Colosseum to be killed, and they were going to feed them to lions. And that turned out to be the lion.
Oh, wow.
And so the lion saved him as well. But as men, we tend to react to pain, distress, grief, loss, all of those things, fear, in that angry way.
Yeah.
And that's usually not what's going on beneath. Anger is usually a secondary emotion.
It's the socially acceptable emotion for men.
Yes, exactly.
But oftentimes it's a gatekeeper to something beneath that or below that. I want to ask you, because you have this unique lens, right, of the research side, many years, 15 years as a professor and multiple decades of research.
I've been studying people for 30 years now.
30 years. Right. And now with your own journey, your own experience, I mean, you suspect you've had this since 86, right? Had MS.
89.
89.
Yeah, 89. Mhm.
Thank you. So what has been the most surprising findings that have come out of both your research and your individual experience, knowing that the research is objective, right? But then you
Right.
have your own nuanced experience within that. Take as much time. I really would love to see what would have been the ahas for you.
I think it's curious. One of the things that I had to learn on my journey is I had to become more humble, because I've spent my professional career always being the expert in the room.
Mm.
And knowledge is one thing, and that's really crucial. That is an important way of seeing the world. But knowledge is not the understanding of having lived through an experience. That's a different mode of learning. And so while I went into this with a deep academic knowledge surrounding distress and discomfort and those sorts of things, I had to learn that the day-to-day boots on the ground experience of living it was a different lens that I had to learn to accept, and I had to learn to process in that way. And I can use the knowledge to condition the understanding, and that's really important.
Mhm.
But humans learn almost everything. I mean, we have these defaults that we come in with. We've got a handful of what might be called instincts and reflexes and reactions and things like that. But we learn. We are adaptable, and we're always learning. And we learn with our bodies and our minds and our behaviors and all of that. And so we need to understand that even if we know something, oh, I know this is what is happening to me, I'm distressed because of this and I'm reacting in this way, I still have to go through the experience and build the muscles of living through it in a successful way.
Yeah. Integration.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And that was kind of tough for me. And one of the ways that I taught myself to be more humble was I put myself in a circumstance where I knew I wasn't going to be good at it, and I knew that I had to succeed or I was going to die. And that was going back to skydiving.
Wow.
Because I knew with my body that doesn't always want to do what I'm, wanting it to do.
Yeah.
In the air, it has to.
The stakes are slightly
Literally.
higher.
Yeah.
Slightly.
Yeah. The stakes are slightly higher. And every time I exit an airplane, I say to myself in the back of my head, 82 seconds. Because from 14,000 feet, my life expectancy is now 82 seconds. And that's not exaggeration. That's not a hyperbole. That's not a metaphor. That is literal. I will bounce on the ground and the ground will win in 82 seconds unless I do something really right.
Mm.
And so going back to skydiving, I had to put myself in a position where it was going to be difficult. And I had to go back to square one, and I had to be humble, and I had to learn, and I had to cultivate that beginner's mindset again, and be willing to fail. And I don't mean fail and I'm not going to get pulled, but fail in the sense that I don't get my body to do everything that I want it to do in that skydive.
Yeah.
And I have to learn from it and keep going back and doing it again and again. And that was really crucial to me, because it allowed me to build confidence. When you've got a medical condition that sometimes leaves you paralyzed on the ground without warning, that causes you to lose this kind of natural trust in our own bodies that most of us take for granted. But I wanted to not just do a skydive. I wanted to become a legit skydiver. So now, yeah, I mean, it's all the licenses and a coach rating, and I'm over 600 jumps, and the thing that I'm going to start working on next is my pro rating, which allows me to land in stadiums.
Wow.
So that's my next goal.
You're gonna get in a wingsuit?
You know, I've got a bunch of buddies who want me to, and you have to have, you know, at least 200 jumps to
Right.
wingsuit.
Mhm.
And so I keep thinking about it, but it's a lot of extra work.
Yeah, and a lot
to
more
do it.
dependency on the body.
Well, yeah, but you know what some of my wingsuit friends tell me is that because you've got all that extra fabric in tension between my legs,
Mm.
it actually might amplify the signals that my wonky legs can give me.
Oh, it's a bit more proprioception.
Uh-huh. Exactly.
neat.
Because and because you know proprioception and interoception are big problems with
Yeah.
living in my carcass.
I love how affectionately you refer to your carcass. Kevin, let's go back, man. Let's go back to when you were a kid.
Okay.
You had these dreams of being like Iron Man and being able to fly around. And you also had dreams of becoming a scientist, right? So
Yeah.
it seemed like, you know, if you don't mind me asking, which decade were you a child of?
Well, I was born in the 60s. I was a child of the 70s, came of age
Okay.
in the 80s, you know.
Right.
So
So prospects back then was, you know, you say, Mom, I want to be an Iron Man. I want to be a scientist. And, you know
well,
what path.
yeah, my first, you know, inspiration was I wanted to be an astronaut because
Oh,
I'm a
yeah.
child of the Apollo era,
Of
you
course.
know. And that was science, and that was getting up in the air,
Yeah.
and so that was kind of a thing. And then as I grew older, I thought, you know, may or may not get into space, but I became fascinated with skydiving in the 70s,
Mm.
and uh, you know, I started climbing trees and jumping from as high as I thought I could survive.
Oh,
And
I did
and
that off my balcony with an umbrella, and it didn't work.
it doesn't work, you know.
No.
I'd make some parachutes and they didn't work, and you know, I'd climb up on the house or high on the deck or in the trees, and you know, I kept doing that, and I survived.
Yeah.
So uh, when I got to the 90s, then I'm a graduate student now. I'm working on my doctorate, and I thought I'd waited long enough, and I found a club drop zone that was a couple of hours away, and started doing the training as a
Mhm.
skydiver. And I got a handful of jumps in, and then I realized that becoming a skydiver is not a hobby, it's a lifestyle choice.
Yeah.
If you want to do it seriously,
Sure.
because it's a lot of time and a lot of effort and a lot of hanging around the drop zone, waiting for the weather conditions to go just the right way, and
Financially as well.
yeah,
Yeah.
and it's not cheap to get into either.
Mhm.
And so uh, I had to, it kind of had to go by the wayside, because it was like, do I finish a doctorate or become a skydiver? It's like, well, you know,
Right.
I'm going to finish my doctorate.
Were your
And
kids born at the time?
no, they weren't. They didn't come along until the early 2000s.
Okay.
So yeah, then I had, you know, I had career and I had kids and I had family, and my then wife was going through a mystery illness at the time, which turned out to be a very advanced kidney cancer.
Mm.
And so I lived the life of chronic illness, you know, and that's because as a caregiver as well.
As a caregiver. Yeah.
Right. And so she's going through that as my MS is finally being diagnosed.
Wow.
And so I was getting it from all sides.
Mm. You know, Christine will tell me she would easily go through cancer again, or a different form of cancer, than to ever witness someone she knows go through it.
Oh yeah. I mean, emotionally, it was as the husband and the father, it was so much worse for me to be standing by largely impotent, watching her go through that,
Yeah.
than what I was going through with my own MS.
Mm. And do you think part of that, well, let me ask you this.
Mhm.
What was your understanding, or what did the environment or the people who raised you in an environment taught you about manhood and what it meant to be a man? What was
Yeah,
the
I mean,
script?
I learned the traditional man script, that was, I mean, I am one generation off an Ozarks dirt farm.
And Isaac, what?
An Ozarks dirt farm, I just, that was, my father was born on on the farm that his family homesteaded about 100 years before.
Wow.
And, he was born in the 40s. I was born in the 60s. And
So,
I learned largely that same set of lessons. It was men are strong, men are providers, men are stoic.
rub some dirt in it.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's like suck it up, Buttercup, and get on
Yeah.
out there and do it again.
Right.
And that was when I had a bully in grade school. It the solution was you next time he does that, you sock him in the nose or you don't come back home.
Mm,
And so that's what I did.
right.
And we became friends after that. But
Interesting how that happens. Hey.
yeah.
So,
So
were those scripts from childhood, were they playing a role at all when you were witnessing your wife at the time go through her cancer journey and you go through your, I mean, it took 17 years to diagnose your MS.
yeah.
Do you think that's also part of the rub some dirt in it, get over it, don't be weak?
Well, I think part of it was when I was first symptomatic. It was toward the end of 1989, and I woke up and I had these weird symptoms that just kind of came out of the blue, and I had paresthesias going on, so I felt this weird numbness and tingling that was kind of coming and going in different parts of my body. I felt fatigue. I felt I had what are called eye saccades, which is kind of like when your eyes stutter just randomly. And I got really down about the whole thing. And so I went to the university physician. This is 1989. I'm 20 years old. I think the physician heard what he expected from a young kid in a demanding academic program.
Mm,
And he said, "Oh, you're depressed."
yeah.
And I was like, okay. I mean, there's this other stuff going on because my balance went wonky. And
Wow.
that was, and the reason why I noticed it is I was taking a fencing class at the time because I love fencing.
Oh, so you could acutely identify that brain body connection was not working.
Yeah, it was weird because I love my swords. I mean, I spin around, I've got my swords up on the wall over there. They're all beat up from years of use. I've got an 8.5-pound bastard sword and my basket hilt rapier and offhand dagger that are up there and
Boys and their toys.
yeah, I know.
So you
But
were identifying there was stuff going on, but it was just slapped with a label of depression.
yeah, there's something going on. And he said, yeah, he said, you're depressed. And he gave me a referral and sent me to a psychiatrist. And the psychiatrist confirmed, yes, this is major depression. And he gave me some drugs. And the drugs didn't work.
Half of the course, drugs. That's the solution.
Yeah. And he gave me some more drugs.
Double the dose.
And the drugs didn't work. And he gave me some more drugs and the drugs didn't work. And finally he said, you are treatment resistant. Which of course is the medical, it's the medical establishment's way of saying we wash our hands of you, you're on your own.
Man.
And so I had from the medical establishment a quote unquote answer. I was depressed and it was treatment resistant depression. And so there was nothing they could do about it. So I didn't really think, and I get this, I'm a young man. What do I know at the time? This is before I'd had all the education and that sort of thing. So it wouldn't have I wouldn't have gone back to have something looked at if I hadn't started in the early 2000s getting a completely different set of symptoms
Right.
that on the surface didn't appear related to the other things.
So, right. So,
I woke up one morning, yeah, and I couldn't feel my left leg below my knee.
okay.
It was completely numb. I thought I'd, you know, done something. I'd pinched a nerve working out or something the day before. And then it was, back again, and then it was gone. And then finally, one morning I woke up and I could feel my right arm in my head, but the rest of my body disappeared.
Wow.
And at that point, my then wife said, I'm putting my foot down. You are going to get this looked at. And so I did.
Help our listeners and me who doesn't know a heck of a lot about multiple sclerosis. Can you give us just kind of a basic rundown of what this condition looks like and how it turns up?
Yeah, there's no reason why you should. Let's say, okay, so a couple of things here. It is a chronic autoimmune neurodegenerative condition. So let me unpack those. Chronic. There's no cure for it. It's not going to go away. And two, it's autoimmune. And we've only understood this in maybe the last decade or so since I've been diagnosed. And what we understand now is that with multiple sclerosis, our immune systems are attacking the myelin in our central nervous system. And myelin is a fatty tissue that surrounds some of the nerves.
That's right.
In our CNS.
Yeah.
So think of it like the wiring in your house.
The plastic.
When the coating gets stripped from those wires, they short circuit.
Yeah.
They can't carry the current as they would. They stop working. And that's what's happening to the places in my brain, spinal cord, optic nerves, my central nervous system. Yeah. And so whatever symptom I experience with this neurodegeneration depends on where the damage has occurred. And since everything we do, think, feel, say, hope, believe, dream comes through our central nervous system, the symptoms with MS can be almost anything. I've got 6 or 8 symptoms that are always there with me. I'm always in pain. I'm always fatigued. I'm always confused. I've always got paresthesias. I've got some balance issues, etc. And then there are another almost 30 symptoms for me that come and go.
Yeah.
So MS is a weird, capricious, devastating condition. When I was finally conclusively diagnosed in 2006, they told me at the time, look, this has been in your system for a long time. You should expect not to be walking within a decade. And that's, over 15 years now, and I'm still walking.
And falling.
I'm falling.
Out of a plane.
So on good days I fly. But here's a man thing out of this with me. That's being told that you're not going to be able to walk soon is kind of a sobering thing.
Yeah, because did you get you into the effort response? Where'd you land out of the?
Well, I said okay. If I redoubled my efforts, and so I'm really creepy about sticking to meditation and nutrition and exercise and all sleep. I jealously guard my sleep. All those things that I can do, because 2/3 of all health outcomes are not due to biomedical factors. They're due to mindset and behavior and a little bit to environment.
You mentioned this in when I looked you up, is you follow the biopsychosocial approach, which is so much more than just the biological. You've got the psychological, and then you've got the social element, which is if you had a lot of people around you going, oh, poor Kevin, you've got this MS, and oh, you're not going to walk in 10 years. If that's the environment that you would be stuck in or choose to stay in, I guarantee the 10-year mark, that probably would have come true, right?
Yeah, well, and so that was really stressful, but I never told my wife and kids about that prognosis.
Really?
Really.
What was your motivation behind that?
I didn't want to distress them. It
Ah,
was
right.
because by this time their mother's condition
Mm-hmm.
was getting worse and worse and worse, and we weren't getting any answers. And I was like, okay, that's years and a possibility out there. I'm not going to add to the distress.
You have more acute
Mhm.
present
Exactly.
needs. See, that's a tricky one, right? Because it's not that you don't deserve support with a prognosis like that. And it's not that you shouldn't have had access to support, but the choice in the moment was we can't add any more to the mental and emotional plate, right, than what
Yeah.
was present with your wife. Do you, looking back on that, do you feel like that was the right thing to do to this day? Do you believe that, or would you have approached it a bit differently now, knowing what you know?
Absolutely not. It was so wrong
Mm,
that I couldn't even I can't even quantify
right.
the degree of wrongness that was.
So done differently, you would have gone and gotten support and shared, and
Yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But again, here's that issue of humility that I was talking about,
Mm.
because I had all of the academic knowledge
Yeah.
about this. I mean, I got a PhD in people.
Yeah.
I've been studying people for
The
decades.
head game is strong.
Yeah, I could list, here's all the mechanisms that are going on, and here's what I'm doing, and yada yada
Yeah.
yada. And that's great. But I will tell you again, I will tell everyone again, that the knowledge is not the understanding
Yeah.
of living it. It's
Uh,
not that one is better or worse than the other. They're just different. And we need both of those. And we've got to find ways in our own lives to bring them together,
mm,
so that the knowledge provides a bigger context,
sure.
but we're also doing the face-to-face, real-time work,
Mm-hmm.
day in and day out, of building those cognitive and behavioral and emotional and social resources.
Where in your life are you standing at a crossroads? What is the resistance that's holding you back? There is a circle of brothers waiting to meet you and stand with you in facing your next step. That is what the online Crossroads course from the Mankind Project USA is about. Facing your resistance and stepping into your brilliance. See the show notes for details.
We've had no shortage of people with DR in front of their name on this show.
Mhm.
And I've been able to connect with just about all of them around the ability to hide behind academia.
Yeah.
And the jargon and the language and the logical understanding. I mean, I'm certainly no doctor, but my own personal example is I could tell you for years before I truly, for the first time ever, felt self-love, could tell you up and down and read you the riot act of why you have to love yourself first. And and it's important, but I'd never practiced it. I hadn't integrated it. The experience hadn't presented itself. So it's all head stuff. It's not heart stuff. It's not coming from pure integration where the head and the heart can connect all the above, right? The context of the knowledge, and then the actual lived experience, as you're saying. I can't judge you or blame you for your response in that moment once you got your prognosis to not tell your wife and your kid, because that is kind of also plays into the man box, as we call it, or the man script, as
Sure.
you mentioned. I'm not going to make my problem someone else's problem, which oftentimes turns up as my problem is not as worthy as
It
what
does.
someone else is going through.
And here's the thing. We think, oh, okay, we will get this other emergent issue handled, and then we'll have the time and the resources to do this other thing
No, it's a
that we're
both
putting
and.
off. It's got to be a both and.
Yeah.
It's got to be a both and, because I mean, look at me. We had for years in my household, we had two unexplained, really serious medical conditions that were going on.
Mm-hmm.
And and no diagnoses yet. Took years for both of us to be diagnosed.
Mm.
And so you think about it, it's like, oh, you drop into, we've got this, we talk about the manuscript, we've got a sick, quote unquote, sick script as well. And that looks something like, oh, you feel bad, you've grown about it, you laze around, you take your meds, you do your therapy, whatever it is, and then in a few days or weeks, you're back to normal and you are healthy again. But that's where it breaks down for a chronic health condition.
Yeah, there's no tablespoon of cement so you can harden the fuck up when
exactly
those myelin sheaths are going to keep degrading.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And half of all Americans now live with at least one chronic health diagnosis.
Oh, isn't that blows my mind, Kevin? I mean, here's an unpaid advertisement for the show Dope Sick. I don't know if you've seen it.
Oh, yeah.
On Hulu. Phenomenal. It's got Michael Keaton, and it's about the OxyContin epidemic that we experienced in the 80s. And I know a lot of people who living through the 80s were hooked on OxyContin, and this just the culture we have around medicine and health in this country. Where is the conversation around prevention?
Well, it's the conversation around prevention. That's one. And two, it's focusing, it's what's called reductionism. And we reduce, part of that sick script that we get is that, oh, what you have is a biomedical problem, failing to acknowledge that there are all the other things that cascade out of that.
Yeah.
And it can only have a biomedical solution.
So, sorry, continue.
No, go ahead.
Well, slight anecdote. In a former life, I was actually a pain specialist back in Australia. I was doing kind of physical therapy, and that was my path for about 5 years. And I work with this.
And you Australians are doing some of the best forefront research on pain management in the world.
Yeah, we are. I didn't know that, but I'll take it.
You are. You are.
Well,
which I'll have to tell yours, and I'll digress on that.
Sure. Well, natural medicine is a really popular path now in Australia. Like, you can actually be a doctor of naturopathy in Australia, and it's a common thing to go to a natural medicine doctor over a regular doctor, and it's insured and everything, which that's a whole other thing. Great progress there. But I was working with this woman who had just basic wry neck. I mean, what I understood to be wry neck, you sleep one night, maybe a fan or some cold air is hitting your neck in a position, and you wake up and you can't turn your head without feeling like you're playing operation with yourself. Very painful nerve pains. I'm sure most of us have had this before. But so it looked, all the symptoms were wry neck. And I was doing all the mobs, and we'd get to the end of a session, full range of motion, no pain. But come the next week, pain was back in, and I was really getting stumped, and I was referring around, and chiropractors, physios, physical therapists weren't getting solutions, but she was enjoying coming in and me just giving her a massage and getting the range of motion. So we kept it up. Then I started learning about the biopsychosocial model of it, and we'd been working on the bio, and it was very clear the psycho element, right? She had believed that this is the way it was going to be. But the social element of her pain, I read up on it, and I asked her, what is the most common thing your colleagues at work say to you when you go into work? Oh, how's your neck going, honey? I said, ask them to stop asking you that question. As far as they're concerned, your neck is fine. 2 weeks.
Yeah.
It took 2 weeks. She had this wry neck for 2.5 years. It took 2 weeks, and her pain in her neck was gone, because the belief, the reality for her, every time her colleagues would say, oh, honey, how's your neck going? boom, me, I have this neck problem. I am this neck problem.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it totally. And this is chapters 2 through 5 of my book. It's it's about pain and distress and something I call the edge, and how we formulate that and come to approach it. But here's my pain journey. So in the aughts, after I started having these periods where my body would just disappear, I also started developing a lot of pain. And pain is really common with multiple sclerosis. Although still to this day, there are some physicians who don't believe that. And it's like, don't even get me started, because it's a real issue. So it's neurogenic pain. So neurogenic pain, it's not like, it's like whenever you have an itch or something like that, I can't scratch it. There's nothing physically damaged in my body where I'm feeling the pain. It's a bad signal in my nerves. I got to the point where I was popping 24 ibuprofen a day.
Oh gosh.
Trying to take the edge off of it, because I knew the research on the opioids and I wasn't going to go there. So 24 ibuprofen a day is,
how many milligrams was that?
Yeah, well, 200, 200 milligram capsules, tablets. I mean, that is, as my son would have said, that's a metric crap ton of painkillers. And on a standard 11 points pain scale, daily I was about a 6 to 8.
Oof.
So this is seriously impeding my functionality. So what did I do? I decided that I would use meditation and cognitive reframing and exercise to address my pain issues. Now, do I still have pain? Yeah, I still have pain. I'm a 1 to 3. Has anything physically changed with my condition? No. But how I frame it and how I operate it and how I move through the world in spite of it has completely changed.
So you were able to address it on a different front, right? Not fight on a different front, because we're not going to use the fight language here, but address it on a different front and a different level. And I've seen that in a lot of people that I know that are chronically ill, that naturally becomes where they go, because there's no other route. It's they have to explore the further reaches of themselves to identify, sure, I'm on my medications, my health journey or path to managing this condition, but there's got to be something else. And that's where you see, when I went down to Peru to do plant medicine, I met a couple people that were chronically ill, and it was phenomenal to see what they got from that process, just unpacking the stories that they'd built around their conditions and how it impacted their lives and their relationships. And so go ahead.
I was going to say, you said the magic word there, story. And story, I think, if there's one thing, and people get into this is not only an academic discussion, but it's one of those sitting around at the bar with your buddies discussion. What makes us human, right? And I would argue that the one thing that is qualitatively different between humans and every other animal is that we are narrative creatures.
Oh, dead set.
We tell stories.
Dead set.
And the most important story that we tell ourselves is identity. Identity is the story we tell ourselves about ourselves.
And interesting.
And when we find a place in our life where it's not going according to our story, that adds a massive layer of complication. to how we feel in the world and how we operate in the world. And
Yeah.
and when you get a diagnosis like multiple sclerosis,
Mm-hmm.
that by definition has a massive impact on your story. And here's the thing, it's not something you chose.
Yeah.
If we can frame it as humans can deal with just a jaw-dropping amount of misfortune if we
Oh,
feel like we have a choice.
look at Viktor Frankl.
Exactly. Great
Viktor
example.
Frankl,
Exactly.
Holocaust survivor, concentration camps, lost his family, his wife, his kid,
Yeah.
all of it. And his whole story coming out of all of that is we
Yeah.
choose. We
Eric
have
Fromm,
the power to choose.
another example from that generation, going
Yeah.
through that same kind of thing. And
Yeah.
so one of the challenges I found that people living with chronic conditions, especially men, because for men, so central to the way we define ourselves is what we do in the world.
Oh yeah.
Not who we are, not how we are being in the world, but
Yeah.
what we do in the world. And a
What you
chronic,
produce.
exactly, and a chronic illness is going to get in the way of what we can do. And it's not something we chose to deal with. And so that immediately impacts our story at the level of agency and meaning, and it's really difficult for us to handle in that way.
Yeah. Have you noticed a difference between women in their chronic illness journey and men with their chronic illness journeys that is, there's nuance to every person, but have you seen some pretty distinct differences in the
Most
approaches?
definitely. Well, just think about it this way. I told you before, over half of all Americans now have at least one chronic health condition. 18% of us have 5 or more. Okay.
That's so much.
Yeah, it's just mind-blowing. And
Yeah.
however, that means that there's a whole lot of men and a whole lot of women who are living with chronic health conditions. Now, it tends to be slightly different ones that tend to affect them, but think about who the voices are in the public conversation surrounding chronic illness. They're overwhelmingly female. They're overwhelmingly female. So what that means is, and that's one of the reasons why I felt like I had to be loud about this. I don't want to go around talking about chronic illness. Yeah, it's not necessarily a pleasant thing to talk about.
Yeah,
however,
part of your life, but not all of your life, right?
It's because on good days I'm jumping out of the sky. But and there's so much more to me. However, it's an important part that I've had to learn to accommodate and reframe. And there are real physical limitations. Now, it turns out that with some care and effort and persistence, what I thought were my physical limitations are not where those limitations truly are. But as a man, there's not as many of us out there talking about life with chronic illness, because if there's one thing that is kind of categorical opposite of almost everything in that man's script, it is being sick.
Because if you're sick, you're lesser than.
Exactly.
You're not up to scratch. You're not up to par. You're not a man.
Exactly. And yeah, I went through a lot of issues there where I was not, I felt that my masculinity was lacking because I wasn't able to do some of the physical things that I'd always done.
And let me ask you, I'd love to get a snapshot of the lows for you, those stories that you were telling yourself, and be as brief or as broad as you want to be with those. And then the narrative when you're having your great days, right?
Sure.
When you're jumping out of airplanes. So can you give us a moment, or frame it with an experience or a moment that you just were in the absolute pits?
Yeah. I mean, that's easy. My low literally was, the place where I could no longer see a path from where I was to any kind of life I was interested in living.
Was this around the same time that you got your prognosis?
No, it wasn't, because the first few years for that, I did pretty well. And we, my then wife, she went almost to death's door. They did a radical surgery at the last minute. And, it turned out that because she got misdiagnosed for a long time too.
Oh,
And
wow.
and then when she was finally diagnosed, literally, we got the diagnosis of it is a very late stage 3 chromophobe renal cell carcinoma, hormone secreting, on a Friday, 2 days before Christmas that year. And the oncologist told us, if it weren't for the holiday, I would check you in right now and we would remove your kidney. As it is, this is a true story. This is exactly what he said, a direct quote. I will give you the weekend to have the holiday with your children and set your affairs in order. And on Monday morning, you will be here and we will take your kidney and we'll see if we can save you. And when they did it, I mean, her kidney was, they did the biopsy and her kidney was 9.3 centimeters. The tumor was 8.8. It had been
Wow.
in her system for about 14 years.
Jeez.
And he said, if we would not have taken it now, you would not have made it to Valentine's Day. So we got her through that. And then it was a really long, hard recovery on the other side.
Yeah.
And so right about that time then, so now I feel like, oh, wow, we're going to have a future and things are going to go better. And I'm going to be able to make the jump from being an academic to being a tech entrepreneur and get this technology I'm interested in. I've been researching for years out into the market and so forth. And so I make that jump and right after that, so now we have no net. So now she's recovered, and she's, starting to get back into the world.
Yeah.
We have no net, and I have the worst exacerbation I have ever had in my life.
Of your symptoms.
Yeah. And it was primarily cognitive.
Oh.
It was a massive right frontal temporal exacerbation. So what does that mean? That's higher order thinking, social processing, emotional control, yada, yada, right? The list of symptoms looks like dementia. And things got worse, things got crazier. We finally come to this point where this woman who, we've loved each other since the 80s and been off and on and off and on, had this crazy history between us, nursed her through cancer. She looks me directly in the eye and says, "You're a worthless bastard." And I'm in there saying, because I can't communicate well at this point, because my brain is completely messed up with this exacerbation. And I'm trying to communicate and I'm trying to get help. And my wife and kids decided that there was no hope for me. And they left. And then 2 weeks after my son left, who was the last one to leave, my dog died traumatically in front of me. And 2 days after that, I was almost struck by lightning. I was knocked off my feet and blinded and deafened and so I really felt like, man, I am Job.
Right.
I'm giving up.
Yeah, you're like, all right, big fella, you missed.
Yeah. But what I said was, I'm completely at the bottom. I am going to give myself one more chance. And I literally meant one more chance. I'm going to do something that will allow me to develop confidence in my wonky body once more. And that was skydiving for me.
Wow. And so just quickly, Kevin, one more chance or
I was gonna end it. I would have committed suicide
yeah.
because
Man.
literally there was no value, nothing that I cared about
Yeah.
in my life at that point, and no visible path from where I was to get back there again. I'd lost everything, career, family, everything.
Yeah.
So I decided I would use skydiving and my science to save myself.
And this was 2000
This was 2019 when I hit in 2017 when I hit the bottom.
wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. And skydiving, mate,
Yeah.
became the muse.
Well, it is. I mean, you see, on the behind me on this video, I've got this picture of me, and it's actually the picture from the cover of my book, and it's it's at 5,000 feet when this picture is taken, and it's the beautiful sun on the horizon, the clouds, and everything. It took us 8 jumps over 6 weeks to get this image, because this image tells the story of everything that I do. So when you get a chronic diagnosis, it feels like the bottom has dropped out of your world, and your life is in free fall. And so in that picture, I'm in street clothes, no helmet, nothing. I mean, I look like just a normal person off the street that has been dropped into an extraordinary circumstance. And I've got both of my hands up to my forehead, like I'm doing a double salute. And I'm about to sweep them out in a broad gesture. So what does that mean? That is a universal signal in skydiving. It's called the wave off. And it is me warning everyone in my airspace that I am about to take action to save myself. Because you wave off, then you deploy your parachute. So at 5,000 feet, I've got 27 seconds left to live, less than a TV commercial. And at that instant, with less than 30 seconds left, I am actively choosing life. And that's what I want people to understand. Guys, when you are at your lowest, I understand it. I've been there. Yeah. I totally get it. And as difficult as it seems, getting to a better life is going to begin with you choosing to save yourself. And there are lots of people to help you. There are lots of guys who we're willing to get in there and support you doing your hard work. But you've got to save yourself. And that begins not with a place of toughen it out. It begins by being kinder to yourself. And I mean be kinder to the man you used to be, because you know more now than you used to. Be kinder to your future self, because he's going to have to live with the consequences of your choices right now. And be kinder to yourself right in this moment, because you know better than anyone else the challenges that you are actually facing. And it's not a contest. If it's difficult for you, it is difficult. Period. Full stop.
Yeah. You can't compare your experience to anyone else's. You can't measure it. It is as real to you as it is to you.
Yeah.
I think this also extends. I've had this mindset. I can still activate this mindset. And I know this is very common for a lot of men. It's like, oh, I'll wait till things get really messed up.
Yeah.
That'll be the inciting incident. Unfortunately, in a lot of circumstances, that can mean, and this is totally separate from your story, Kevin, but I've seen this in circle is wife leaves, kids leave, after the domestic violence, after the jail time, after the drug abuse, after the addiction. It's all after the effect, because our take it on the chin, rub some dirt in it script allows things to get bad and fester to the point where we have to wave the signal and say, oh, it's this or death.
Yeah.
And why does it have to get to a point where my back's against the wall to really change or to really affect meaningful change? Like, why is that such a common thing for so many men? And I just can't help but not see the link to the man box.
I do have an answer for that, but it would be like a whole nother podcast episode. but it's, yeah, it's true. And it's sort of like boiling the frog.
Yeah, exactly.
It's just a little bit.
Yeah.
And suddenly you are way out over your edge. And when we become distressed, and when we don't allow ourselves to rest and recover and recuperate, then our capacities diminish. But we're still out there thinking, oh yeah, I can do that, because you could do that under the best case scenario.
Yeah, your identity tells your story tells you that. Yeah.
But right now you can't.
Yeah.
And so that's why, on the cover of the book, in those images, I really do frame it as you choose to save yourself or you die.
It's I don't know if you're into I don't know if you're a geek like me and like into D&D, but like,
oh please. Okay. I actually have on a shelf downstairs the first D&D, not advanced D&D, D&D box set from like 1977 or 8.
Oh mate, the devil's work, that D&D.
Yeah, I lived through that.
So it's like some people's stories, no story is linear, but the way I tell my story can seem a linear process, whereas with your chronic illness, Kevin, yours is a 20-sided die. Kevin walks through a field, 20-sided die, rolls a 17. Kevin gets attacked by a dragon. Can't use his left leg. It's and the variables and of course the one thing that won't change throughout that process is these practices that you've instilled and these processes that you've been able to take your pain from a 6 to an 8 to a 1 to a 3 that allows you this life you have now. And I'm walking away from this interview now, Kevin, with a far greater appreciation for my body and my health and what it affords me and what it allows me to do. And having been a professional gymnast, I definitely am reminded almost daily things I've done to myself and hurt myself. And I can get into that kind of victim place of like, oh man, like this back injury has been hanging around for 12 years now. And then, but what if the narrative was, look how much my body can do, and look how much I can do today to prevent becoming a part of that 50%, of people that live with chronic illness. So before we wrap up, Kevin, mate, this has been awesome, but I just want to ask you, like, is there a snippet from the book that you can share that isn't in the blurb?
I'll go back to this biopsychosocial idea. And I'm by training and disposition, I'm a social psychologist. So, I'm not an MD, I'm a PhD, and yet all of the research from the last few decades, especially, we see when we expand our understanding of health, and I like to talk of quality of life. So it's not, it's quality of health and quality of life. When we're interested in something called health span, not lifespan, health span, because your lifespan is how long you're going to live. Your health span is how many years of that total you're going to be relatively healthy and functional. And so, I don't know how long I'm going to live. But I do know that, with MS, some of the data says it may chop around 7 years off my otherwise, lifespan. But it really threatens my health span, because I am in danger of being trapped in my own body. And someday it may happen, but I'm going to actively, strategically, persistently work to counter that for as long as I possibly can. And in chapter 13 of the book, in the last chapter is called Thriving. So I guess I'll end with this note. We all talk about being happy, leading a happy life. And that's really nebulous. And we talk about leading a good life, and that's really nebulous. So in that last chapter, I break it down. And what the research tells us is there are only 6 values that matter for leading a good life. Do we feel happy, satisfied, functional, engaged, meaningful, and secure in our world? And we don't have to feel all of those all the time, but we have to keep regularly returning to places where we feel those things.
What were those again?
Happy,
satisfied,
functional. So do we have agency? Are we willing to, are we able to work in the world? Functional, meaningful, secure. Happy, satisfied, functional, engaged. So connected to
so not
ourselves,
not
to
isolated.
other people.
Yeah.
Exactly. To the world around us, to nature. That's the way people tend to find that. Those are the things. And so if you just look for happiness, well, happiness is fleeting. And a lot of the things that we find really valuable as humans don't make us happy. They make us feel meaningful. They make us feel engaged. They make us feel, useful, right? So we need to broaden our understanding of what living a good life means. And we need to understand that, and here's another long discussion we didn't get into, but often, especially with men and with our, mindset that we grunt out, that's a primal mindset. And usually when that's running the show, that means that you are feeling somewhere stressed, distressed, threatened. That is that effort response that is starting to rear its ugly head. And yet, as men, we don't want to acknowledge that.
Yeah. Can't admit weakness. Can't admit things are wrong.
Because it's not, it's not a weakness. What it means is that we are at our edge.
Yeah.
And the edge is where we learn and grow.
Yeah.
It's not where we actually grow. It's where we trigger the growth. Then we have to go back to our home. We have to go back away from the edge so that we can rest and relax and recover and nurture ourselves. And that's where the growth happens.
Yeah. It's the hero's journey. You enter into the journey, you go through the ordeal, there's a death, a rebirth, and you take the lessons back to the tribe and learn and recover, sharpen the axe, and back in.
And you go again.
The language is so relative to what we do with the Mankind Project, which we ask people, what is your edge or what is your stretch? Because the comfort zone truly doesn't serve. Whereas you've had your comfort zone ripped out from under you. So you've had to live on your edge. And look what's come out of it, mate. So Dr. Kevin Payne, my friend, thank you so much for joining us for this interview, mate. I'm walking away with so many deep insights, and I can't wait to share this with friends of mine who I have a multitude of friends who experience chronic illness. So I'm excited that we get to package this and give it as a gift to those out there who are experiencing this, either as caregivers or those that are experiencing it themselves.
Well, I am so delighted to have had this conversation with you, Brandon. Thank you so much. And best to everyone out there.
Beautiful. Well, guys, this has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, the show where we break the molds of modern manhood to prove there is more than one way to be a man. What do you say, Kevin? Have we done that today?
I hope so.
I know so. So, so big thanks to you, Kevin, for being here. And also, of course, thank you to all of you out there live joining us on our Facebook feed and those who are listening through wherever you find your podcast. This is all possible because of you turning up, giving your ears, and the fee for today's episode is to share this with those that you care about, those that you love, those whom you believe will benefit from the insights and the topics that Kevin and I have covered today. So please share this on if you feel like there are those that will benefit. And if you get the chance, not if you get the chance, go to iTunes and leave us a review, please. It's and I'm not asking for the obligatory 5-star review because, we want to earn our reviews. If it's a 4-star, it's a 4-star, and I want that feedback. If it's a 3-star, go review someone else's podcast. We don't want a 3-star review. But if you get the time, please jump into iTunes and leave us a review. It gives us much more exposure and the opportunity to reach many more people out there. So if you believe that these messages are important, and if you believe it's important that we as men unlearn the old scripts and models of manhood to equate to a healthier and happier human species, then please share, rate, review, and we will see you all next week. Lots of love. Well, there you have it, another powerful episode of the Mankind Podcast with Dr. Kevin Payne. I tell you, I feel so grateful to be able to sit in this chair, speak into this mic, and have conversations with people like Kevin. I tell you, I mean, to be in the room with such incredible human beings that have done so much research and just pledged their lives to finding answers to all these interesting, different kind of problems or situations that we're facing as a society. I mean, in this episode, the destigmatization of men's mental health and physical and emotional health. I mean, it's just so fun. It's so fun. And I get to hear from a lot of you who send me emails and send you testimonials that have shared the impacts of these conversations and what they've had on your life. In fact, I've got a little review here from iTunes from B. Kelly Yo. And he says, I started listening to this podcast as I was exploring the Mankind Project as a place for me to connect with other men. I've listened to every episode since the first. Now, while not all episodes resonate for me, the forum within which they exist has brought me so much. My feelings of alienation from men in general and my fear of being in connection with men have softened, and I enjoy listening to other men's perspectives and passions. Mostly, though, I have gained great insight into the complex web that is my inner being in hearing all the viewpoints that are presented. I feel called to dig deeply, to find my best self and heal all manner of relationships in my life. And it helped me to commit to an open men's group where I have shared some of my deepest shame, cried for loss. I have put on myself and borne witness to the pains and joys of other men willing to be vulnerable in a community of men. I am hooked. Well, Bill. Maybe your name isn't Bill, just B. Kelly. I don't know, could be Brian. B. Kelly-O. Thank you. Thank you for taking the time to write this. It means the world to me. In fact, if we talk kind of algorithmy, I won't bore you too much, but these ratings and reviews help position the podcast to others. It gets it in front of more people. And in fact, the more ratings and reviews on iTunes that we collect, the more reach we get, the more men we can reach. And so I want to ask and encourage you that if you yourself are like B. Kelly-O here, who shared his feelings and his thoughts on the podcast, please, I would love to hear yours. I'm not asking for the obligatory 5 stars. If it's 4 stars, then please be honest. But I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear how the show is impacting you and perhaps the lives of those around you because you've listened to this show. So that is my ask for today. And my hope for all of you is that if you yourself are experiencing any forms of pain, be that physical, mental, emotional, just know that you're not alone. And sure, the old scripts of manhood might tell you that you have to bottle it up and you have to hide it and you're not allowed to share it with anyone. But look, the data doesn't lie. That does not work for the majority of men. Not everyone, but it doesn't work for the majority of men out there. And so I want you on this planet for a long time. I want you around listening to this show forever. I don't know. It's 2022. Who knows what kind of science we got coming on the scenes. But all that to say, stay healthy, check in with yourself. Find out what's going on, look for answers, and don't hold these things off. Trust me, your loved ones around you will appreciate you taking care of your well-being. Lots of love, and we'll see you next week. This has been another episode of the Mankind Podcast, produced in association with the Mankind Project USA. We have been your hosts, Paul Newell, Boyson Hodgson, and myself, Brandon Clift, and we want to thank our guests for joining us today and imparting their wisdom from their experiences in this amazing journey called life. If you want to find out more about today's guests and support them in their mission, you can find links to them in the show notes. Now, if you have found gold and insights that you believe could benefit your loved ones and those you care about, be sure to share it with them. And of course, we are always grateful for a rating and review of the show on iTunes. Now, we've got to give special thanks to our back-end team, producer, editor, and audio ninja for the show, Michael J. Russer, and Don Huff, who takes care of our graphics and promotions and pretty much makes us look pretty. So, of course, thank you, Don. Now, above all else, we've got to thank you, the listener. Because through your attention and your support, you have made it possible for us to let men all over the world know that they are not alone and that there is more than one way to be a man. And if something in this episode has touched you, then perhaps it is the call to action to get involved in men's work. With live trainings happening constantly and in-person trainings happening all over the world, the Mankind Project definitely has something for you. Now, if you've enjoyed the music in this episode and all of our episodes, be sure to check out Jim Donovan and the Sun King Warriors. I have links to them in the show notes. And lastly, just know, what it means to me to be a man is completely different than what it means for you. What it means for Paul, what it means for Boyson, that is the beauty of this journey. So if you are looking for guidance, support, and community as you begin to unpack and dive deeper into your men's work journey, then you know where to find us. Same place, same time, next week. Lots of love. We'll see you then.